before we start the proceedings.
Good morning, everybody. I welcome you all to the India International Center on this pleasant morning. It's a great privilege for me to welcome Her Excellency, Madam Priya. I also extend a very warm welcome to Professor Enrique Dussel. Mr. Arturo Arias is also very warmly welcomed by us to this morning's seminar. This important seminar is being co-hosted by India International Center in collaboration with the Department of Germanic and Romance Studies, Department of Delhi University. Not making much ado about the topic, I would hope and wish this seminar a great success, and I hope the experience will be very rewarding for all the participants. Welcome once again, and I wish you all the best for this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Datta. Before we start, I would like to apologize on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Yogesh Tyagi. He sent me a message saying that unfortunately he had been asked to be at the ministry, since he's the Vice Chancellor, and Vice Chancellors in India also have to play very often very bureaucratic role, so he had to go there. I'm sorry for that, but take me and my colleagues over here who will be representing the Delhi University. I would request now Her Excellency Ms. Melba Priya to say a few words of welcome and encouragement to our participants. I would initially itself appreciate all the help that the Mexican Embassy has offered us for organizing this seminar.
Thank you all. Good morning. Thank you for having me here. I would like to firstly thank the Delhi University, of course the India International Center, and Viva, who is chairing not only this inaugural session, but has been vital for doing this. I am also very grateful for the presence of Professor Dr. Guru Enrique Dussel, who has come from Mexico and before from Argentina, and hardly needs any introduction, as he indeed is one of the most important figures in Latin American philosophy of the 20th and of the 21st century. At least that's how we see him. I congratulate Delhi University and India International Center for organizing this interesting and outstanding conference on emerging epistemological options and inter-cross transcultural dialogue. Okay. I am convinced more than ever that these encounters are needed in the relations between India and Latin America. I feel honored, I feel humbled, and somehow daunted to be given this opportunity to address you in an introduction to the conference. Certainly, there is in this congregation bright minds that I look up to. So the conversation that you are all about to have is of outstanding value. I also find that we can still seem distant and foreign into these discussions for any common individual. Even as a sociologist, many of the titles of the sessions in this conference seem like tongue twisted to me. But I keep thinking about what would happen if all of us, every person, or maybe not every person, but a lot of us, could have the knowledge that unites us here today. What would be the impact that could have had on our lives? While this is a topic to be discussed in yet another international conference, I do believe that many of the issues that you will talk about here, that will find voice in this venue, will be of interesting application and reflection for the everyday life of everyone. So I can only speak to you as a Mexican living in India, and I can share with you some of the concepts which I think are most useful for the people who are in the front lines of intercultural communication between India and Latin America every day. From my colleagues, the ambassadors and other diplomats, from business people, from academics, from students, and we who live that every day. The concept that I would like to address to you today is the otherness. This relevant and world today, the other. The question of the other has fascinated philosophy throughout the years, taking inspiration from Hegel's dialectic of identification and distanciation in the encounter of the self, as well as many other great thinkers. The encounter with the other is a topic that will be addressed in session 2 and throughout the conference, but it bears a special significance for the clash, yes, the clash, between the Indians and the Latin American culture. It is worth reflecting on the notion of the other, on the construction opposing and at the same time on the construction of the self. From an idealistic and spiritualist point of view, it seems that it is given to each one of us originally, as if oneself and one's own physical experience, some of which only partly refer to other individuals. As a matter of fact, even as children, we have to undergo the process of emotional development to realize that there are others outside of us who have their own personal experiences which can or cannot be compatible with ours. This first otherness comes as children from the Oedipical triangle, where girls like me have to assume that man or mom or dad is different than mom and I. So how do we account for a place of the other in our human experience? How do I and must I relate to others? How do we construct the other? Just like joining a social club or an organization that identifies as certain elements of exclusivity, we cannot belong to any group unless others belong to it too, even if it's my club. Throughout history, all human communities have been in contact with different groups they perceived as others. In every society that we think united, we see others living in it. These contacts have generated images, even stereotypes and prejudice that have influenced the way identity is constructed. Ideas of similarity or difference are central to our achievement and the sense of identity, and again, the other. Reflecting on these issues, I think that Latin American and Indians who have found each other in this increasing globalized world can find that they have been seeing themselves as an extreme from the other. We have not been used to one another in a historical sense, and there is much that we still do not know about our cultures. So sometimes it is hard to remember how much Latin America actually resembles India. After all, our Mesoamerican and Inca cultures and all of our pre-Hispanic cultures were Asians in the beginning, who crossed over the Bering Strait during the early human migration. At the same time, Asians came from Africa. It is widely accepted that all human beings came from a common African ancestor. So who really is the other? It is useful to remember that when we are faced with a strange and overwhelming sense of the other, that we actually all came from the same place. My point is that even from the origins, there were many more similarities between us that we just don't prefer not to see. Zooming on a particular case in the Latin American and Indian relations, I always speak about how when the Spaniards came to Mexico, and I mean Cristobal Columbus, they looked at our forefathers, at people like me, that looked like me, And they concluded from looking at the tone of my skin, oh, we have arrived to India. And that is why we, from that moment on, were called Indians. The name stuck to us until these days. Spaniards, those Spaniards that came to Mexico, to the Americas, thought that we were Indians because they found a similarity in the tone of our skins, or because they actually had never been to India to know better. But looking back, these perceptions seem to have had a deeper meaning and even a tint of foreshadowing. Because finally, all of this time, and after the colonial experience with which both our millenary cultures were impacted, today, in the post-colonial era, we come to find each other again as developing countries, as emerging economies, and we come to notice a myriad of similarities among us to go way beyond the color of our skin. One of the problems of the link between Latin America and South Asia is that for a long time we have seen each other through the prism of Europeans, and even now, of the Americans, of their media, of their popular culture. This has led to a series of stereotypes and misunderstandings that have hindered us to see clearly who we really are. If we could remove these lenses, even for a little while, we would be able to see the experience that we have lived throughout our historic, and we have had our similar history, more similar than what we imagine, from our food, from our customs, from our idiosyncrasy, and our future challenges. Of course, Octavio Paz was many of the great people who ventured to build these kind of bridges between South and South. To wrap up my intervention, let me say that to understand these ideas, the thoughts of Professor Dr. Enrique Dussel, our guru, are particularly helpful. As you are all well aware, through his work, he achieves to decentralize the Eurocentric perspective and goes beyond modernity and colonialism in order to reach what he calls the transmodern world. But what really does transmodern world mean? A transmodern world is about all those aspects that go beyond, but also before, the structures of modern European, North American culture. And that prevails where the great non-European cultures are. And Latin America and India are one of those. Through all these reflections on the condition of the otherness, on the European tainted glass with which we have seen and we have been inclined to see each other for a long time, I think that the modern adventure that flows constantly from one culture to another may find that we have more in common than we let on. In these times, the need for new knowledges originated from our own cultures is greater than ever. These dialogue, like the one that begins today, construct precisely that. Objectives to build bridges, to understand that the new knowledge is deeply needed in today's world, when it is sure that it is us, the emerging economies, the new world, the oldest world is now the new world, that will determine the future of the world in these years to come. I applaud the organization of this forum, where great minds can come together and talk and discuss and think and imagine, that will make our countries more connected, stronger, and better prepared to face all the challenges of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for a wonderful introduction to start our dialogue here today. I think it's the most appropriate discussion that you started. I want to, actually, I'm so overwhelmed to see such a good response from all the embassies of Latin America. I extend my welcome to all the ambassadors who are present here today. And I hope that during the course of this 3 days of interaction, we'll be able to actually establish that dialogue which will be long-lasting. And as I wrote in my in our concept note, that this is just the beginning. We want to provide a platform so that we could continue the intellectual interaction in future also. I know that Dr. Dussel had been having a very close and friendly contact with Venezuela, with the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and I'm very happy that the Ambassador of Venezuela is here today. I would request him to say a few words of encouragement for this conference. Excellency Montiel, Ambassador of Venezuela.
Thank you. Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much, Professor Viva Moria, for the idea of organizing with all the colleagues of Delhi University this very interesting way of putting together once again in perspective, if we are to be together in the South-South relationship and thinking about how the world can be liberalized from something that we must become aware of. That is precisely, I think, the concept of study of such an interesting conference as this one on emerging epistemological options and transcultural dialogues, Latin America, India. Thank you very much indeed to Viva for giving me the opportunity just to say a couple of words. I will remember that in the year 2009, as I call him, Enrique Domingo Dussel was in Venezuela invited to receive an award, the Simón Bolívar Award for Critical Thought. And he was there, and I was in that audience when he was given this award. And at that time, and certainly still at this time, we think that there are instances when people in the world, especially in the South, are still able to find a way of being respected, of being thought of as humans that produce, as humans that provide, as humans that exist and that are part of the world. I think this experience, Viva, is an excellent opportunity for a lot of social scientists, and especially our friend Enrique Domingo, to express precisely the vibrant feeling between Latin America and India to exist, and not only to exist as economies, but to exist as regions of the world with a culture, with a mindset already of states of mind for living happily and dignified lives. I think that was the origin of the award Simón Bolívar for critical thought. I was just some minutes ago talked about this, and I looked using technology, and it says here, he wrote a book, Política de la Liberación, Politics of Liberation, and that was the book that was given the award, the recognition, and his author was on the ontological moment of naming politics and focusing politics from a perspective of the problems of the South as they are created from the problems of the North. and in particular on America Latina, that has been looking for a way to express politically and socially that we do exist and we are not only the backyard of somebody else. And I personally, academically, and politically think, and even diplomatically think, that that is an excellent way of sparking thoughts. And that's why I can only be grateful for this moment, for these 3 days we're going to be sharing ideas, thoughts, that cannot come from only thinking about, as we are being called today, emerging economies. We want poverty to be reduced. We want development to take place in our societies. But development and liberalization from the burden of poverty and indignity can only take place if others allow, because certainly peoples and worlds and countries are fighting. For example, in Venezuela, we are fighting to keep control of the largest oil reserve in the world. But others think that that reserve is theirs, and they want to take it away. So we fight for the right to be independent. And he, in these kind of books, in these kind of awards, and in the essence of what his critical thought, when he comes to talk to us about epistemological decolonization of world history, encompasses. I thank you very much, Viva. And this is a good chance to remember precisely that who gave you that award in 2010, President Hugo Chavez, Simón Bolívar Award for Critical Thought. I think the world will thank the culture of India and the culture of Latin America for having created the possibility of enhancing, in general, human culture and epistemology. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. I would like to also mention here that amongst us, as Mr. Datta said, also have Mr. Dr. Arturo Arias, who is from Guatemala, presently living in the United States, who is an award-winning writer, and we will be listening to him tomorrow on other knowledges. He has a massive volumes of work and research in the knowledges of indigenous literatures. I will just in few seconds start the official part in the sense of the keynote address. I perhaps will say a few words about Dr. Dussel before he takes over the stage. Perhaps go there. First of all, it's an incredible occasion for India, I think, for us to have a great philosopher, thinker, historian amongst us today, and who will be addressing the public. I think perhaps Dr. Dussel doesn't know himself that how much popular amongst the intellectual he is here in India. And I must tell you that Dr. Dussel has been coming to India since 1980s, and it is perhaps his 5th or 6th visit here. So it's not that he doesn't know this country. He's very well versed. When we were coming from the airport, and I was trying to tell him that you will see Delhi so changed, and we laughed because we didn't know whether we'll be able to see anything in the midst of that smog. But anyway, that day, fortunately, the smog had cleared a little bit, and we managed to see whatever you call the development or disaster of a city which was so historical. Dr. Dussel, Mexican philosopher, but Argentinian also, has a huge history as a thinker from global periphery. He has a long and vast area of studies. He has made some path-breaking research. He explores the reconstruction of the history of modernity and critique of Eurocentrism, reconstruction of the later Marx, concepts of analectic and transmodernity, and a number of other ethical frameworks. His immense contribution to the fields of philosophy of liberation, ethics, political economy, theology, and history is recognized all over the world. His recent works provide a corrective to the Eurocentrism of Western philosophy, seeking a solution to the problem of universal standards for ethical claims, while responding to the particularities of distinct cultural legacies and traditions in context of the production of the other through the process of globalization. So what Her Excellency said in the beginning is very much central to all the discussions and are going to be central to all the discussions here. Dr. Dussel was born in Argentina in 1934. In his student days, he was an active member of the liberation theology movement, and one day he was attacked with a bomb in his house by a paramilitary group in 1973. He was forced to exile in Mexico in 1975, and today he is a Mexican citizen. He is Professor Emeritus in the Department of Philosophy in the Metropolitan Autonomous University, campus Iztapalapa in Mexico City, and also teaches at the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He has acquired his doctorate in philosophy in the Complutense University of Madrid and a doctorate in history from Sorbonne in Paris. He is the founder of, with others, the movement referred to as Philosphy of Liberation. Through his critical thinking, he proposed a critical way to read universal history. Author of more than 50 books, and hundreds of articles, Dr. Dussel has maintained dialogue with philosophers such as Karl Otto Appel, and he told me yesterday that he had 7 long years of dialogue with him, after which a 5-volume book was produced. He had maintained dialogue with Gianni Vattimo, Jürgen Habermas, Richard Rotary, and Emmanuel Levinas. He spent 10 years studying Marx and has proposed 16 theses of political economy. Once talking about himself, he mentioned, "I belong to a generation of Latin Americans whose intellectual beginnings are situated in the 1950s, after the end of Second World War. For us in Argentina of that era, there was no doubt that we were a part of Western culture. For that reason, some of our subsequent categorical judgments are a natural expression of someone who opposes himself. With my trip to Europe, in my case, crossing the Atlantic by boat in 1957, we discovered ourselves to be Latin American, or at least no longer Europeans from the moment that we disembarked in Lisbon and Barcelona. The differences were obvious and could not be concealed. Consequently, the problem of culture, humanistically and philosophically and existentially, was an obsession for me." Unquote. Dr. Dussel, so happy we are to have you here. We give you the word now. I think we can. Dr. Dussel told me from the very beginning, when I was having a conversation with him, even on phone, that I am not a very technological man. So he is going to use the blackboard, and we will all have to sit on the other side so that we could listen to his lecture, which is epistemological decolonization of world history. Thank you.
First of all, I must to say that I don't speak English. I speak something like English that I call Spanglish, because I didn't study in any university of the Commonwealth. I was in Spain and French and Germany and other countries, but not in the Commonwealth. And for me, exactly, it's very important the idea of Boaventura de Sousa Santos that say that the dialogue between cultures means a dialogue, but the dialogue needs translation, and the translation is a problem. And in this case, you must open your ear to understand my English. Because of that, I use very much the blackboard like the teacher in primary school. But the diagram said Charles Peirce, the first philosopher of America, pragmatist, that the diagram up the concepts. So I use very much the diagrams. I am very honored of this invitation, and I accept true, because I would like learn. And yesterday, with my friends, that helped me to visit a new time some historical places of this city, like the palace and the mosque and the temple. I was many times in the past in India in the 80s. I know Madurai, I give 2 lectures, Cochin, Mumbai, and other countries or the other cities. Thank you very much. And I admire very much this culture of India. For me, it's a very exemplar place. But in going here and there, I learned very much things, because my subject of today must be related with the reality that we live in this moment. The subject that is my exposition of today is the epistemological episteme, science in Greek. Decolonization, that is a new word, but it's very important, I think, of the world history. And especially it's important the history, because the history is like the framework of all human or social science, the literature, the history, everything. The psychoanalysis, the philosophy, the anthropology, the sociology, the economy, the politics, all science has one historical presupposition. And it's very important, because I gave lectures in many places of Asia, Philippines, Thailand, here, and other countries. The last month in Morocco, in the Arab countries, in Cairo, in all countries of Europe and Latin America, and in the state of United States. And in all these places, 2 in Africa, in Kenya, and in different places, there is one vision of the world history. It's fantastic. In the primary school, in the high school, in the universities, in all the world, there is the same diagram, periodization of the world history. And that is very interesting. The Eurocentric vision of world has one historical interpretation of the development of the human being the last 10 millenniums. And this vision accept we all. To the nationalists that would like struggle for the nation, India or Mexico or Germany, they have one special vision. And this is exactly the modern vision of the world history, but not modern. It's only 200 years had this vision of the world history, And it's like a fetishism that we accept and we believe that is science, and it's a pure ideological interpretation that's nothing of science. I will show you the invention of the periodization of the world history, and I say invention, is a product of a German generation that is called the Romantics. Schiller, Schlegel, Novalis, and the culmination is Hegel. And this is very important because Guha the life of Hegel is very important in the time. Guha, the Indian historian that is the grounder of this movement of the self-alternate studies, in the year 73, began to discover a new vision of history in India. And 4 years before, we in Latin America, without any connection, we begin to a new interpretation of world history in '69. It's very important, the dates, because, for example, the Philosophy of Liberation, as we call so, is beginning 69-70, a group of professors in the south of Latin America, in relation with 1968, the May of Paris, the Tlatelolco in Mexico, with 400 students was killed in the Tlatelolco place. But in Argentina too, the Cordobazo was the students with workers that take a city, Cordoba, and destroyed the dictatorship of Onganía. 68 was very important. We are like the inheritance of the 68, and our thought had almost now 50 years ago. It's before, it's important the dates. It's before, for example, this book of Edward Said, Orientalism, 1976. We begin 69, Guha 73. The postmodern movement, Lyotard in Paris, 1979. That means the 70 was very important movement. Samir Amin was Egyptian that works in Ghana to begin to see the world system in other manner. 66 is beginning of the dependent theory valid today, and I will speak tomorrow on these questions. That means in the 60s was a crisis and began a new vision of things. And I begin to discover that there is in all the world the same vision of history. In which sense? For example, we speak on the antiquity or the ancient history, the antiquity. And after the Middle Age, and after the modernity. And always I ask, you studied in many universities, one of you did or saw another periodization of the world history? Say to me, I. Nobody. And I am in India. I asked the same in Kenya. Nobody put the hand. I was in Berlin, Marburg, Yale, Frankfurt, many cities in Germany. Nobody. In United States, Harvard, I was professor in Harvard, in Notre Dame, Northwestern University, all people. In Buenos Aires, Rio de Janeiro, all people. In Morocco, more than that. In next April, I will go to Tehran, and I read a big book on the history of the Shiites Islamic world, and say in the origin of the Shiites and in the Middle Age of the Shiite civilization. I use the word Middle Age. I say I will be in Tehran, and I will begin my lecture to say, you speak on Middle Age, an Islamic historian, but the Arab world, the Islamic world, was never in the Middle Age, and there were not feudalism in all Islamic world. That is only a periodization for Europe. The feudal society existed only in Europe, or not in any other country in the world. And they generalize a historical category, feudalism, and put in all places. I studied very much Marx. I have 5 volumes on Marx. I did something in Mexico that not other did. Marx wrote 4 times the first volume of Capital, 4 times. And he changed in each draft. And I did the commentary from the published in German and unpublished in the archive of Sloterdijk in Holland and in Berlin. I know very well Marxist, and I think that Marx, not the Marxist-Leninism, but Marx is very valid today. But Marx used the same periodization of Hegel, was Eurocentric, and this is a problem. It's valid, but not in history. From where comes this vision? It's a history of the history, or history of the historiography. This was exposed more or less in the 1790 until this time, 1818, was Novalis said in the thesis of Walter Benjamin on the concept of critiques in the Romanticism in German. Novalis said, we invented the antiquity. How is it possible that a group of philosophers and historians invented the antiquity? Yes, the concept of antiquity. Before this generation, the classic culture was Egypt, not Greece. Was an invention that philosophy began in Greece. And once an invention and Mittelband and the historian of arts, that the Greek art was the most prestigious in art of the old world. When we see the first statues in the Egyptian civilization, we see exactly the old statues of Greece. And you say, there is an influence of Egypt in Greece. No, Greece is the origin of philosophy, of art, of beauty. Greece. Because the central point of the antiquity is Greece. Roman, and after Middle Age, and after modernity. And the antiquity, what means? We need to read Hegel, the philosophy of history. He said, the history goes from the east to the west. East to the west. And Europe is the goal and the center of the world history. There is a center of the world history. He said in German, and Europe or Europa is the Zentrum and the Ziel der Weltgeschichte. Europe is the end and the goal of the world history. And the history begins, yes, in China, in invasion, because was not. And after the spirit of freedom, Hegel go to India, here. And the Geist, after the spirit, go to the Persian Empire, and after to the Hellenistic world and the Roman Empire. East to west, that is the antiquity. And the freedom is more and more free, because in China was free only the emperor. It after become the people in Greece. But after that began the Middle Age. But for Hegel, the Middle Age is the Germanic world. And after began the modernity, and the modernity began with, in philosophy, with Descartes. And there is the culmination of the world history, and I don't speak on this question. This is a pure invention, doesn't exist. And we study that. We must change the curriculum of all universities of the world, and especially of the South, because where we are in this vision, we are not. And Latin America, less, is not. Latin America began to be when Europe discovered the fourth part in the world, because the first part was Europe in the South Africa, in the East Asia, three parts of the world, like the Trinity for the Christians, sacred, holy. You cannot think more than three. But if you think in the fourth part, that is that the fourth person in the Trinity is impossible, is irrational. And America put a question. And Hegel said, America has not history. It's the land of the future. Africa had not spirit. When the spirit is close to Africa, the African has spanned on the spirit because are irrational. You must read what said Hegel on America. He said, it's undeveloped. The rivers didn't finish to do the course. The flowers are more exotic because are very primitive. The animals are not so developed like the European animals. They objectify the primitive on the savagery to the animals and the plants, not only the human beings. It's a total negation of the non-European world. It's comic when Kierkegaard listened the lectures of Schelling in Berlin in 1841 against Hegel. Kierkegaard understood that Hegel became comic, but we take as the true doctrine of scientific doctrine. I have no time because I have 1 hour. That is a pure invention. And with this invention is the discovery of America. And the millions of Americans, people, didn't discover America. And Hegel said, the human being discovered America. And the other are not very human. And that was the first question of philosophy. The Indian, the fourth part of the world, are human or not human? That is a very philosophical question. And thus it put in the 14, I will show another history. We need rethink totally the world history to begin to exist. To India, because India is not only a colony in the military, economical, political level, it's special in the epistemological level. And we teach this negation of ourselves in the primary, high school, bachelors, master's, doctors, and professors. All levels, we teach that we don't exist. That is the question. Other vision of history. That is a role of the intellectual today to do a new vision of history where we have place from the beginning. And that is a question for the future. But my first lecture in university, 1966, many years ago, but was my first semester, was Latin America in the world history. Because Latin America, special Latin America, was out of history. India was always in the history, but Latin America in the Hegel history doesn't exist. To understand Latin America, I needed to begin a new history. I will speak some minutes that need to take some semesters, but I wrote many on these questions. I have a book, than 700 pages, The Politics of Liberation, a critical world history, I read, with 2,000 and more footnote, and 100 pages of bibliography that I use, and you can read. And I do a synthesis now. We are in the technological movement, and so you can take my web page, and there is some English, is my name, .com. You can see in your computer, and you can have, because I put all books gratis. And it was in Seoul, and say, what you put gratis? Yes, because I would like the students can read, not buy. Read, that is important. Buy, that is not question. No? And you can read that all this in my page, web page. Other vision of history, I think in the third age of the interregional history, interregional, in the Bronze side, until 2000, before the Common Era, until. And so I needed now a map of the Asiatic Afro-Mediterranean continent, no Eurasia, because Eurasia is Eurasia, is Orientalist and Eurocentric. And I put Asiatic, Afro-Mediterranean, because didn't exist in Europe in this moment. So I do a sketch of Europe, the Scandinavia, Spain, Italy, so Mediterranean Sea, very quickly. Africa, more or less is not so, but you see, India, Southeast, China, and the east part, I put America. That is the map. The broadside had the first tab. The first tab is the Neolithic revolution. That means the cities. The cities, the oldest cities that we know are in the Euphrates and Tigris, exactly Iraq. Iraq. In the north of Iraq, south of Turkey, here, my map is less difficult. Arabic, so. In the south of Turkey, we have cities of 7,000 before the Common Era, 7,000. That means 7 millennia before the Common Era. And in Iraq, we have the first old cities and the first code of right and many things. And Gunder Frank, one Holland, German, Latin America, Gunder Frank, spoke on the 5,000 years system because he took Egypt in the beginning. But we are all, our cultures, out of the American cultures, part of this big Bronze Age civilization. For example, our week had 7 days. That comes from Mesopotamia, from this place, 7 days. And we have so many elements of many thousand years without any consciousness. And it's very interesting because the codex, law codex of this part, for example, Hammurabi, the king of Babylon, he said, I did justice with the widow, with the orphan, with the poor, with the foreigner. I have there one ethics, and I have there a politics, critical ethics and politics valid today. In which constitution we said we take the foreigners as one citizen of the country, in non-one. That means Hammurabi is more developed in right than the Roman law, the modern law, the Napoleonic law, or all constitution. Did justice with a foreigner? It's a question of politics. Did justice with the poor? That is the economical question. Did justice with the widow? That is the gender question. Did justice with the orphan? That is pedagogical question and critical. I have there the category of philosophy of liberation of today. The totality of the system is the law, the order. But the other is beyond the law. Is the poor, is the orphan, not my son. The orphan is not my wife. The widow is not my concitizen, but the foreigner is the other. And if I do justice with the other, that is a critical philosophy. That is philosophy of liberation, 3,800 years before the Common Era in Babylon, 50 kilometers of Baghdad, where Baghdad was destroyed by the barbarian of the first 21st century. Mr. Bush and company. In the future, we will see like barbarian. I spoke in United States with a Jewish professor, woman, and she said, I am Jewish. Yes, from where? From Iraq. Oh, and your family was in Baghdad? Yes, from the 4th century. We are the author of the Mishnah, the family. The Mishnah in this region that's after become Baghdad, because Baghdad was founded 526 until the took of the Turkey people. I will speak on Baghdad after. But you see, that is the center point of the world history, and we have many aspects of this region. That were one civilization in the Bronze side that's expanded in the Mediterranean, and the other is Egypt. And the first dynasties of Egypt are 5,000 years ago, 3,000 years before the Common Era, and come from the south. It's Bantu, it's Afro, black. The Africa, said Hegel, do nothing in world history. Ha! Did Egypt, that is the mother country of the Mediterranean civilization, the Egyptians, is Bantu. Tutankhamun, in the tomb of Tutankhamun, are all shoes that used Tutankhamun in the life. You can see in the Museum of Cairo. What there is all shoes, because Tutankhamun will be resurrected. The Egyptians believe in the resurrection. That was the myth, of Osiris, or Osiris, the god of Tebas. It's a myth. But attention, Paul Ricoeur, my teacher in Sorbonne, said, the myth is a rational narrative with symbols. Rational. The resurrection is a myth, but means that the human being is as the unity, the corporality, living corporality, and die, but is to resurrected. That means that the body is very positive. The first commandment that Osiris demands to the dead person to do the resurrection in the Book of the Death, chapter 125, Osiris asks to the dead person that he has a principle of subsistence after the death, but not is the soul, because the Egyptians and the Semites are not the soul, but the corporality is unite. Ask what you do good in your life, and what answer the death to merit the resurrection. I did food for the hunger. I did water to the thirsty. I did of dressing to the naked, a sheaf for the peregrine. All materials means in relation with life. That is an ethic. The criteria is give food to the hunger, not to contemplate with intelligence the beautiful divine things. Give food to the hunger. That is a special ethical principle, and political principle, and economical principle, and many principles is a life question. I will speak tomorrow on this question. There I find a full ethics too. I wrote a big ethic. Tomorrow I show you 700 pages on this question, only in this, because it's the ethic from the South, because the South is exploited by the North. And that is the question today. And for me, the book of the death of the Egyptian 5,000 years ago is very actual, because it has an anthropology, an ethics, and vision of history, and many things very interesting. Egypt. After, we must go to the India, but not 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, or before, especially in Punjab, before the Aryans invasions, and is the Bronze site, is this part of India, before the Rig Veda, Upanishad, and all that. That means this period of history before 1000. And in China, the region of the Yellow River, 2,000 years before the Common Era, the I Ching. The I Ching, you know, is not an alphabet or the language science, but the I Ching is a table of possibilities, 8 and 8. And that means 64 possibilities. And they put there 64 different signs. The first is 3 lines and 3 lines. That is a perfection. And from there until the wrong or the evil, that is the same but divided. So 3 and 3, but divided, that's the evil. And in between of these two, there is 64 different signs with a philosophical meaning, and they put a name from each of them, and that is the framework to interpret the life until today. The drop of South Korea had lines. And perhaps you ask, what means these lines? Are the signs of the wisdom of the old. And the 2 principles of Drang and Yang, those are the 2 principles of world. We have another philosophical thought in the extreme east of the East. But 30,000 years before the Common Era, 30,000, the Homo sapiens crossed Bering and arrived to America in the same time that the Homo sapiens destroyed the Neanderthal in Europe, more or less 30,000 years. That means the Homo sapiens arrived in America and Europe more or less in the same time, and go to the south and organize the Mesoamerican high culture. Teotihuacan, a city of 50 kilometers of Mexico City, was a city in the 300 until 900 after the Common Era, but was a city of 100,000 population, people, a big city with the pyramids like the Egyptians, the high culture. And the Inca Empire, from Cali in Colombia until the Rio Maule or Mendoza in Argentina. The Inca Empire was bigger than the Roman Empire. almost 5,000 kilometers north-south, and the Roman was 3,500 kilometers. Fantastic. We are here, the six, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 big cultures, like the 6 columns of the world history. America is the extreme east of the extreme east. All our original peoples come from Asia, all. Some are like the Mongolian, the other are like Indochine, and all these regions, the islands, go there. But after there is the Polynesian civilization, and the Polynesian civilization crossed all the Pacific, and here we have Samos, the island Samos. Good. From Samos, the people go to Chile and go to New Zealand and Australia, and the Maori and the New Zealand and the Mapuches in Chile call to the leader of the community Toki. The same word in Australia, New Zealand, and Chile. And they use a stone that I was in New Zealand in the museum, and was one stone, this form, and say Toki. And I asked, who is the use of this stone? That is the stone of the leader in the Maori people in New Zealand. And in Chile, I asked to the Mapuche, which is the name of your leaders in the war against Spanian, Toki. And the Spanish people couldn't conquest the Chilean Indians until 1880, only with Mausers and the telegraph without electrical communication, because before they resisted the Spanish with the strategic of the Polynesian civilization. They was together against the Spanish people, an army, 2,000 Indians, but after, there are not cities, and they dispersed. And the Spanish, when would like struggle against this Maori, Samos, Mapuche strategy, there is not armies, there is not cities, and couldn't never conquest the south of Chile because it was a Polynesian strategy. The Pacific was the center of the American civilization. That's all was in the Pacific and the mountains, more than 2,000 meters, the high cultures. The tropical was not so developed, etc. That is the first vision. There is not the antiquity. And against Hegel, like you see, the history goes from west to the east. Mistake of Hegel, that said east to west. No, that's the invasion, or better. In this time, we didn't know these things is the ignorance. Entonces, the antiquity, Middle Age, and modernity is the expression of the ignorance, not of science. The second moment of the, I said, the interregional cultures begin, in my vision, of the expansion, not the bronze side, but the iron time. The iron and the horses. You see, in Mongolia, Gobi was domesticated, the most quicker instrument of communication until the train in the 19th century, the horse. 6,000, that means 8,000 years ago, the Mongols begin to domesticate the horse. And a horse with iron weapons and the harsh iron instrument for the horse, and a special for the, how called, la herradura, the horses had only one finger, and they had the naddle, and they needed a protection of iron. So the horses with the iron, the weapons, begin the invasion from north to south. And thus are so-called the Indo-Europeans that perhaps doesn't exist. Semerano, a etymological scientific person in Italy, said that doesn't exist this language, but the Sanskrit was one of them. They invited China, the Chuechi, they invited India, and that was the Rig Veda, the Upanishad, 2,000 years before the Common Era, the presence of the Irish, but the Irish in Greek is the Aristos, is the better people. They were the Persians, the Medos, the Greek, the Latins, and the Germanic. They organized the first big empires in the world history because of the horse, because the iron. The peasants' cultures, the first period, now in the second period, was dominated with the iron and horse civilization and do slaves. And we have the Persian Empire, and we have in India many empires, and at the 220 before the Common Era began the Chinese Empire until 1911, that is converted in a republic. The Chinese has a long stability. That is true that the Mughal invaded China and they put the wall, but the Mughals arrived in China and became Chinese because the big culture adopt these invaders. Thus there is in China a very impressive stability, and I will speak on China, because the actual development of China is not a miracle. Until the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 19th century, the end of the 18th century, China was the most developed country in the world. I will speak. But the Chinese discovered the paper 6 centuries of the Common Era. The printing machine in the 8th century. In the 9th century, the Chinese printed paper money 1,000 years before Europe. And all the technology of the Industrial Revolution come from China until the machines. You can read the Hobson book on the origin of the Chinese technology in the Industrial Revolution in England, but I speak after. China is a very special country, but it's not immediately the center, because there is an alternative. Thus, the bronze site was, the center was here. But now, in this development of the Indo-Europeans, the central point became more in this region. And the Greek civilization was a new civilization that took the 3 influence of Egypt, of the Phoenician, and the Mesopotamian, and a special Phoenician. The type of cities in Greece come of the Phoenician cities, Tiro, Byblos, Sidon. They invented the alphabetic scripture. The organization of the ship of the Greek ships in the Mediterranean is Phoenician. All the political organization, the democracy come from Phoenician cities. The Phoenician cities, for example, Gaza today, Gaza. That is in the newspaper, and Israel destroyed Gaza. Gaza is a city with 7,000 years. That was exactly between Egypt and Mesopotamia, and was a power. Tyron, Sidon is in the Lebanon today, and the Greek civilization took all of the Phoenicians, and Athens, the philosophical Athens, is a colony of Sais. Sais was a city in the end of the Nile city, Egyptian. Pallas Athenaeus, the goddess of Athens, was the goddess of Sais. That was the capital of all Egypt in the 66 until 400. Thus, in this time, Athens was a colony, and all of Athens was in relation with the mother country that was Egyptian city size. Herodotus, Plato, Aristotle said the philosophy come of Egypt. But the Germans in Berlin, with the reform of the University of Berlin, with the brothers Humboldt, said the philosophy begin in Athens. It's a pure invention. It's not 3,000 years before Athens there were philosophy in Thebes, and we have texts of philosophy. They say the god of the Egyptian was Thoth. Egypta means the adorator of Ta. Copto and Egypto is the same. Said me one bishop in the first cataract in the Nilos when I was in Egypt, here in the first cataract, and he said Copt and Egypt is the adorator of Ta. And Ta has a language, and this language is the wisdom and is the knowledge, and from there come the logos of Greece and the dabar of the Hebrew. The logos become flesh. That's an Egyptian expression. That means Jerusalem on Athens, Jerusalem and Athens are daughters of Thebes, the mother culture of the Jewish people and the Greek people, Egyptian. So I go now more to Odysseus, more than the Adamic myth, Adam and Eve, and Prometheus, because Osiris is the earliest myth of the Mediterranean Sea. We need to have another interpretation. All these people, and India play a very important role. The Rig Veda and the Upanishad has a dualist vision of human being, the soul and the body. And the Greek put the psyche and the soma. And the soul is divine and the body is more related with the desires, plurality, and the evil. And there we have a dualist vision of things in almost all these cultures. The Chuechi, the Vedat civilization, Perse, Greece, and Roman, the Indo-Europeans. I see the time, and I have not too much time. The third moment of the world history, for me, is the expansion of the Semitic civilization. Not only the Jewish, but especially a sect of Jewish people. The Christianity, in truth, is a Jewish sect that is very open, that the Jewish people call Goim in Hebrew. That is, the others that are not Jewish. And that they were a messianic people. Messiah in Hebrew is Messiah. Is Christos, and from there come Christianoi, the messianic people. And it's very interesting because they, in the long tradition of the Egyptian and Mesopotamian thought, believe that the other is the origin of the order. The other is the creator of the order. The Upanishad and the Rig Veda believe that the order is holy, the caste. And if you don't accomplish the exigencies of the order, you are go out untouchable. That means that the order is holy. But for this vision, it's exactly the contrary. The order can become evil. And in this case, the destruction of the order is the good. In the name of the poor, that's the untouchable. But in this case, you need another paradigm that you have in the myth of Moses. Moses was in Egypt an untouchable, was one slave. But Moses struggled against the Pharaoh, that was the law, and go out of Egypt in the promised land, the actual order and the future order and the new order. That is the redemption or the liberation. It's other type of rationality. So these people, that's what the Christians begin until the old Roman Empire and arrive to Mesopotamia with Heraclius in the 600s after the Common Era. But after, in the 23, Mahomet in the Mecca, struggling with the rich people in the Mecca and in favor of the poor, was expulsed of Mecca and go to the Medina. He begins the expansion of the Islamic civilization. And that is a big question because they conquest all the earth of the old civilizations that was in this time Christian. They go to Africa and 711 cross to Spain and arrive to Poitiers in 736, 150 kilometers on Paris. If the Arabs had took Paris, I spoke in Arab today and not Spanish. But not only that, they conquered Afghanistan, that was Buddhist, crossed the north of India, the Mughal after the Indochine, until Philippines, Mindanao, in the 13th century. That means that in the 1492, the Islamic civilization was from Morocco in Atlantic, the Fatimid Egyptian, the Baghdad Caliphate, after until Mindanao, and after they conquered the road of the Silk to China, was a unique, universal, if I can say, Euro-Asiatic civilization. And Europe, the actual Europe, Latin Germanic, because the Roman Empire was divided in Yugoslavian. And this part was Latin, and the other was Greek. And the capital of the Greek civilization was Byzance, founded for Constantine 330. And this Constantinian empire was now conquered with the Islamic civilization. And the Europe, the actual Europe, that was Latin Germanic only and not Byzantine, was excluded of the world communication. And that's this wall that's in the end of the 14th, 15th century put the Ottoman Empire, Islamic, constitute the Middle Age phenomenon. What is the Middle Age? Only in Europe. Is the isolation, the underdeveloped, and the least developed country or civilization in the world in this time. That's what Europe. And for the European was the obscure time, the decadence. And they think that all world was in the decadence. No, the Caliphate of Cordoba, that was Cordoba, Spain, Maimonides, or in Rush Averroes was a philosopher of Cordoba, and Maimonides was a theologian Jew that after he was infested in Morocco and he finished in Egypt. But they could go to Baghdad. And from Baghdad to China, there were many caravans with camels. Each year, 100 camels that connected the Mesopotamian with China. But only one European, Marco Polo, one champion, arrived from Italy to China. And I saw a bus, Tata, Marco Polo. They said the Olympic champion that arrived one in China. On each year, 1,000 and 1,000 people of the Islamic world from Baghdad arrived to China. But Europe was isolated. The comprehension that the Middle Age is the isolation, underdevelopment, and primitiveness of Europe can begin to put the question, my question. My question is, what means the modernity? That is, how this isolated, underdeveloped, and not center of technology, science, or nothing, become the modern Europe? That is the question. And there we have a dispute. What is the origin and the cause of this European development and the crisis in the all other civilizations? That is the question. I have only 10 minutes for the subject. But you understand now that was like one introduction. That is against Weber, is against Habermas, against all philosophers in Germany, all Derrida, Foucault, Foucault not only is Eurocentric, is Francocentric. Didn't go out of France. Don't know Germany. In the end of life, begin to read Heidegger, Foucault. It's fantastic, the provincialization of Europe. And the Americans is worse. And we saw the new president. That means that we are in the bad hands because are very primitive people, especially the American people, because it's the effect of a media domination. But that is not the subject of today. This small Europe, 7 million persons, and only China in the time as 150 million persons more than Europe. That was from Vienna in Österreich, Austria, until Granada in the January 1492, the King of Spain expulsed the last Islamic people of Granada, finished the presence in Europe off. But the Ottoman Empire was in the port of the wall of Vienna until 1686. That means it was there. And Europe was isolated. With the Crusades, they go to the center of the market of this big world. India and China was the most developed countries in the world. And the commerce between the both, with the industry of textile in silk, with the porcelain, the Chinese, was the technology in 13 was published an encyclopedia of technology of China. You can read the book of Knit Ham. 10 volumes, the history of technology and science in China. There is a book, 500 pages, Chinese, on technology, the machines in the agricultural level and the industry of the textile industry. You see, only in the silk was necessary more than 6 million persons that need to develop the trees, the moras trees, the worms until the silk textile. This book arrived to Italy, and Leonardo da Vinci had the fantastic designs of machines. For example, one related with the other machines, and one move and the other move, and there is a technology. Leonardo da Vinci was a very important inventor of technology. But Menzies took the design of Leonardo, he compared with a technology book printing in China that arrived in Italy. It's a pure copy. Leonardo didn't invent nothing. They copied a book of technology of 1 century before of China. Fantastic. The Renaissance in Italy has the Chinese impulse. The Industrial Revolution became China, not in England. Read the book of Hobson. Is the father of the great father was the author of the imperialism that Lenin commented. And this Hobson is alive now. He's professor in Sheffield in England. And he said, the Chinese engineers installed the first factory in acero. Acero is not iron. Steel, the first steel enterprise in England was installed by the Chinese engineers in 18th century. And so begin one per one all the machines of the Industrial Revolution in the agriculture level in England and show that all was Chinese. Fantastic. That is, read you, this book of Needham had 10 volumes. It's not a small book. It's 10 volumes on history of technology and science in China. Good to say that the crusade couldn't go beyond because the Islamic world was very strong and they come back and was closed, couldn't go out. What was possible? That is my hypothesis. Because, for example, Toulmin said, perhaps the origin of modernity is the invention of the printing machine. And he said, 1486. And Toulmin is a very important American philosopher. He's an ignorant. Believe that Gutenberg invented the printing machine. I was 2 years in Mainz, the country, the city of Gutenberg, in the Institute of History in Germany. And there were one statue of Gutenberg there, 50 meters of my room. But the Chinese invented the machine 500 years before Gutenberg. That means Toulmin had not any knowledge, big philosopher of America. Habermas said, what is the origin of the modernity? He said, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the French Enlightenment, the English Parliament. You see, Italy, Germany, France, England. The south of Europe, Spain, is not. It's not. Because it's not Spain, it's not Latin America, because we were a colony of Spain. But Spain was shut. Go out of world history. Because with the Enlightenment, the north of Europe, that did the Industrial Revolution, deny the south of Europe. There is a south in Europe. And they said Hegel, the beautiful Hegel. The north of Europe is the earth of Europe, Germany, Denmark, and England. Denmark was an empire at the time. But the south was Greece, Italy, Spain, and Portugal. Was, but is not more. That is the vision of enlightenment. The 16th century despair. That means from 1492 until 1630 doesn't exist in the history of Europe, because Descartes wrote in Amsterdam 1637 the method, discourse of method. And that began the philosophy after the Greek people. And you see, from 1492 until this, there is 150 years without philosophy. Why? Because the Spanish people was in the Middle Age. In the Middle Age, or was the origin of modernity? That is the dispute. Where can go Europe with beyond the wall of the Ottoman Empire? Can go to Russia, by Russia, in the north, Russia. And Russia began the conquest of Siberia, he arrived to Kamchatka in the end of 16th century. That was the conquest of the North, but was very difficult and not very integrable. But the other open was not go with Portugal to Africa, India, China, because Portugal was so small, 1 million persons. Spain discovered the Atlantic. That is the question. The discovery of the Atlantic is the modernity. It's the end of the Mediterranean Sea centrality, and is the central of the new geopolitics and military and economical and political world. And the small island, England, that is in the Eurasia, one island. On here there is other island, Japan, are the two islands of the continent, Eurasia. The small island, thank you. The small England will become the center because it's an island. That means it's not a continental country, but it's only ports. And the people of the continent in the struggle of religion go to England. And England becomes the center of modernity. But the question is, and I see that I almost took my time, 1 hour, and I am in the beginning. But I have tomorrow other lecture and I can go beyond. But you see, for us, and when I say us, it's a group of persons in the South that begin to feed the dialogue. And for me, it's very important today be here, because the important is begin the dialogue between India, that is the old civilization, with Latin America. That's too. The Mexican city was a big city too, from many years, and we have agriculture exploitation in the Valley of Mexico more than 9,000 years too, and we have the agriculture exploitation 9,000 years ago. That means it's a big civilization. The question is, we must discuss if my hypothesis works or doesn't work, or is necessary discover other. For me, the beginning of the modernity is not endocentric interpretation. The Europeans, Max Weber, for example, said, how is possible that the culture of Europe become universal? And he goes to the history of Europe, Middle Age, and the antiquity until the Greek and the prophet of Israel, to show how Europe was superior and the other cultures. And go always in Europe. I say, no, Europe was not superior and any other culture until the end of 15th century. Now, but inferior. But in this moment, yes, begin to have some priority. But from what? The hypothesis is the coloniality. And this question is not put with any authors. Jacques Goody, that is a beautiful book, The Theft of History. The European took the information of other cultures, take this interpretation, and after deny the other, and say the Oriental despotism, and put in the primitive people, and they took all of this. But it's like in the computer. I take one archive, I read, I inform, I take all the ideas, and after I disconnect the archive. And not only, I deny the existence, and not only, I said it's an evil archive. And that is the methodology of the Europeans. They are pure imitators in the beginning, but they are the inventor of all. No. You take the information, and you have a genius of development, yes, but not too much. You take always of the other cultures without said thank you and not recognition of this depth. For us, China, India, on all the Euro-Asiatic civilization had colonies. China didn't need colonies because we're very strong. India has a very important commercial world, has not colonies. But the possibility of Spain against Habermas, Toulmin, and all these Eurocentric authors, Habermas is alive in Frankfurt. And I said, Eurocentric. And I see him in the face. And Professor Appel, that is the teacher of Habermas, discussed with me 7 years. And in one seminar in Frankfurt, Appel, with Habermas, one time, he said to Habermas, but you are Eurocentric. Appel learned from us that means Eurocentrism. Very beautiful. Spain arrived not at the extreme east of the East, but now at the extreme west of the West. America is not now in the Pacific, but in the other part of the Atlantic. The question is why the Atlantic was not discovered before. That is a question. And I put in a dialogue with the Arab thinkers, Tariq Ramadan, why the Arab that was in Morocco, in the island in the Atlantic, didn't arrive to America. Why? And he said to me, never I thought. Why the Islamic world that was so developed couldn't arrive to America? And the arriving to America is the origin of modernity. It's not the Renaissance, it's not the Reformation, it's not the Enlightenment. That are phenomena that will develop. But the question is that the Spanish people find people in America without horses, without iron, without bronze, without weapons. Was very easy to do the conquest. Very easy. The Indians couldn't resist the invasion. Then 12 October 1944 is not the discovery of America, it's the beginning of the invasion of America. And the violence of Europe first, the argumentation after. Habermas said the relation must be rational and the arguments. No, that was Bartolomé de las Casas. I will speak of him because he said the only manner to cultivate these people, the Indians, is with rational arguments. And he said that in 1514, before Machiavelli, before Luther, he discovered the dignity of the Indians. It was a thinker, Bartolomé. This is the first critical of the modernity, against the modernity in the beginning. I will speak. I did my dissertation in Sorbonne in this period, and I discovered Bartolomé de las Casas that was very denigrated in the time, in the 60s of the last century. was a person not very scientific because they put very big numbers of Indians that was killed. It's true, that was so, like Bartolome said. The colonies means for Spain, from the north of Mexico until the Maule River in Chile, more than 2 million kilometers square until 630. That is more the whole square kilometer of Europe. They have a new territory to expand. And he has more than 15 million or more people that work for the metropolitan countries without any salary. Because first, it's necessary to demonstrate that they are not full human. And because they are not full human, we don't need to pay salaries. And the Indian goes to the mine, Potosi, that was discovered 1546 in Bolivia. And the same year, Zacatecas in Mexico. And they took from only the mine of Potosi 20,000 tons, 100 kilos of silver in 1 century. And this silver goes to Europe and the primitive accumulation, and they buy with the silver of America in the Chinese market, because Europe couldn't sell nothing to China until 18. The end of the 18th century, the European couldn't sell to Chinese nothing, because China was more developed than Europe in all level of technology and commodities. And only they could buy with this American silver. But that means a devaluation of the silver in the whole world. And the Islamic world become poor without lose any money. But because the value of the money is low, it's devaluation through the importation of the silver. And it's interesting, in Bolivia, a bishop, Catholic bishop, in the year 1550 said, and I read in the archive of Sevilla in my doctoral work, 4 years ago, the Spanish people discovered a mouth, the mouth of the evil, where they involve a big quantity of people to their God, that is the gold. And it's a mine with the name Potosi. This bishop saw the mine as a god, where the Spanish people, the Europeans, made human victims to the new god, that was the money. And I say always, that is very actual time. My first lecture in my bad English was in United States on the dollar. I took the dollar in the 75 and I began to speak my primitive English. And I read with the people $1. And in $1 said, in God we trust. I said, oh, there is a mistake. This in God we trust. Mistake. In gold we trust. That is the money. For the Semitic people, the money was mammon, a god. And the other was the god of the poor. This American that chose yesterday, Trump, believed in the gold. And Marx was atheist of the gold, not of God. I will show. And that is the question. The modernity is a danger. And I will see the development, this modernity, that began related the concept of modernity with the concept of coloniality. It's impossible to understand what is modernity without the correlative, constitutive concept of coloniality until today. And this is a theoretical question. It's economical, political, philosophical, literature, theological, mythical, on all levels. And exactly this modernity imposed a discourse in the interpretation not only of history, of all daily life, and we take as true. We, the colony, and they say, you are not. The being is, said Parmenides. Parmenides. The being is. The non-being is not. And you say, that is evident, stupid, that I'm not meaning. Ho, ho. The being is Greek. And the non-being are the barbarian. Heraclitus said, the human being are in the wall of the city, Greek, and beyond the wall of Ephesus are the barbarian. They are not being human. They are not human for Aristotle and the Greek philosophy and modernity. To be European is to be human. And not to be European is be human, but a second category. Until today, go to Europe, go to the United States, and you will feel how you are not same. Until today, I was in Harvard, professor, not a student, never. Professor. I teach, I don't learn in this country. And they asked me ethnicity. What I put? White or Indian or black or Latin. Because I speak very bad English, the secretary said, put Latin, the fourth, the last. The inferior, you understand? We suffer too through the language, with the culture. That is from the Greek time, but the Greek was regional because it was a regional culture. But now it's worldly. Europe, United States, and the people that is in the place of the white people like Japan are. And the other are in the second level until today. And the equality is a problem. And that is the question of decolonization. Because we are not colonies in the political level, more or less. Economically, absolute colony. Today, India, too, like Mexico, and all the countries in the south. Militarily, we are colonies. United States produced 50% of the weapons of the world. And so, in the other levels, the question is, and also epistemologically, we repeat your narrative. That's be a masochist situation. We love to be inferior. No, it's not possible. When I go to Berlin, to Harvard, to Paris, I say to the colleagues, professors, young people, because they, at 65 years, must go to the retreat. But in Mexico, we don't take the retreat because it's an economical question. To say, I have more than 80 years and I am professor. That means all professors in United States and Europe are young people. So I say young people studied in Berlin, in Frankfurt. The Frankfurt School of Philosophy, the most critical school of Germany and Europe, Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, Habermas, Appel, are absolute Eurocentric. And we are beyond them because we begin to see the world, not only Europe. But I speak very long, but it's the beginning of the question. I wrote the last 45 years on this question. And I have many books, and you can perhaps begin to read, to do this dialogue. Today was not a dialogue. Tomorrow, yes, because tomorrow I will speak some question more actual, and the question of that I call transmodernity against the postmodern hypothesis of the critical thought Eurocentric. Because all postmodern are Eurocentric. And we can see the limitation of this thought and go beyond that. In this case, we have a panorama very interesting for the young people. We must rethink all. And the young people said many times, there is no subject to do a master or do a doctor. All is still done. No, all is to do. Because we must take the same question, but in another perspective, and there is another development and other conclusions. And that is very creative, it's fantastic. I read the books, and I see all in the other manner. And I learn my students to read critically the classicals of Europe, and our classicals too, to reevaluate the importance of our own thought, that we have very good thought, but we don't know very much. Thank you.
Well, I think that we have overshot the time, but I think it was worth overshooting this time, and now we'll go for a tea break. If you can shorten it, it will be better. So, but anyway, the next session will start at slightly later than 11:30. But we'll try and come back as quickly as possible. Thank you very much. Thanks, Professor. It was absolutely amazing.